Welcome to you all, and allow me to start our meeting with Her Excellency Bouthaina Shaaban, Advisor to the Presidency in the Syrian Republic. Please, Dr. Bouthaina, proceed. Welcome.
Thank you. My friend Shara, thank you so much for your wonderful words about Syria. This expresses your original belonging to this Arab nation and your evaluation of our history, our civilization. I thank all of you to have taken your time, and of course I thank those who invited us to this meeting, and I thank all participants who decided to take their time to put a word for Syria and for the Syrian people. And I feel quite optimistic that life is changing and the world paradigm is changing with the will of people such as your good selves. Allow me to start that right from day one of the war on Syria, on March 15, 2011, we felt as Syrian people that we are fighting a double-edged war that is going on the streets with people of flesh and blood, being led by well-organized secret forces which instruct them what to do and how to do it. And the second, no less horrid war was waged by Western and Gulf media to try and promote concepts and narratives which focus on confusing Syrian people about what is happening, why is this happening, what is the ultimate objective of all what is happening. I remember that on the 24th of March 2011, the Syrian leadership and government held a meeting and decided to respond to all the requests which were promoted by people on the streets. I was asked to convene a press conference to all media corps in Damascus, and actually after the conference most Syrian people felt so optimistic that they went out celebrating and having dinner thinking that the problem is over, as there were demands and the government responded to these demands, and so they thought that the problem is over. Far from it. After 24th of March, the movements on the streets increased and spread in many parts of the country and in all directions. Now that we got to read, and actually after that, most Western countries withdrew their media people from Syria, and Gulf countries too. They withdrew their media people from Syria and they substituted them for eyewitnesses, which they chose from anywhere for any reason to pay each one of them $200 a day. Now that we got to read some leaks from different directions, we know, according to leaked British papers, that the UK officially funded Syrian men and women, calling them eyewitnesses. All Western and Gulf media were withdrawn, and they relied on two sources for Syrian news. All Western media relied on two sources for all the news about Syria. One source was these eyewitnesses who were recruited by some British or other agents, and the other source was one person who sits in Coventry, UK, and who is called Rami Abdurrahman, who invented for himself a platform called the Syrian Platform for Human Rights. Western and Gulf media and Gulf governments were pressing Syrian officials to dissent and they were actually offering them big amounts of money to leave the government and to leave the country, promising them that the system will collapse within 1 week or 2 weeks. Early in April 2011, I used to meet with American, British, and French ambassadors, and who used to tell me that the Syrian people want better life, the Syrian people want a better place, and I told them all what is happening is not going to make the lives of the Syrian people better. On the contrary, it's going to make the lives of the Syrian people far worse. And I think the example of Afghanistan and Iraq are live examples in front of us. Now, after all the destruction that has befallen my country, and all the death and the bloodshed, and loss of lives and institutions and archaeology, and part of our civilized identity, it is very obvious to us that Western governments, especially their military and intelligence services, planned, trained, and sent thousands of terrorists with Gulf money and Turkish backing to destroy Syria. And they were never interested in making Syria either democratic or free or a better place for anybody. In fact, it was a very good place for all of us. Rather, they wanted to turn Syria to a satellite state that follows their orders so that they can loot our resources, just as they are doing now. Thinking more deeply about the point, Western powers have always treated us as they colonized and derived their views about us from the Orientalists, who always looked down at us rather than deriving their views from our reality or our history or our set of values. Why subjugating Syria was so important to Zionist and Western powers? All of you know that Syria is the jewel of the crown in the Arab world. That's why they devoted billions of oil money, arms, and terrorists to do the job for them. Once they recognized that this mission is impossible due to the resilience and sacrifices of the Syrian people, they shifted the focus of the war from a military war to a horrifying criminal, coercive, unilateral measures against the Syrian people, which are absolutely illegal on all counts, and they are actually a form of collective punishment against all the Syrian people. Once major terrorists were defeated, the US sent its own military to starve the Syrian people and to loot their resources and to break their will. It is now obvious from what has taken place in Iraq, Syria, Libya, and Yemen, and of course Palestine is always the case, that Western powers are intent on destroying our countries and looting our resources. A byproduct of the war in Syria was that China and Russia came in together very early in the war. On the 4th of October 2011, China and Russia took the first double veto against the Western plans to target Syria militarily. The arrogant American sanctions against Russia and China and their blatant interference in Chinese affairs through what they call the case of Taiwan or Hong Kong or Xinjiang actually is promising the birth of a new paradigm to which Syria and the war in Syria and the friends of Syria have contributed. I personally believe that the reason why Joe Biden was brought to power is to correct the transatlantic relations that suffered during the previous administration. But in order to stand in the face of Russia and China, but they will not be able to do that. It is the logic of history. China is an ascending economic, technological, and moral force, and its alliance with Russia and other countries will certainly establish a multipolar system. But the other reason is that the war on Syria helped to prove and I stress this point, that Western policies towards Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, and Yemen are bankrupt, and the narrative that fills their screens and papers is no longer credible to any of us. Many friends I have, and myself included, used to be avid followers of Western media. No more. None of us waste our time to know what they are fabricating or what truths they are trying to conceal from their Western audiences. Credibility is of utmost importance, whether for a person or for a state or for a system. And once it is lost, the party doesn't exist. The latest example is what the OPCW did towards Syria. Although those who went on the ground and investigated and wrote their reports give evidence that the OPCW has changed the reports and omitted the facts that prove that Syria is innocent of the accusations, nevertheless, Western country voted against Syria and took Syria out of the OPCW. But I tell you, the loser is not Syria. It is the OPCW that lost its credibility in the eyes of many neutral and logical people across the world. On the other hand, China and Russia are gaining credibility in the eyes of the world, and their address of the COVID-19 and its vaccine is a clear example of the efficiency of China and Russia compared to the inefficiency of most Western countries in handling the plague. As far as our people and our countries are concerned, we are sure that the transatlantic world is a colonial power, but its reality and lack of concern about human lives and the greed to loot our resources and the fabrication they make in the media are all now very clear to everyone. They have never been as exposed as they are today, and part of the favor is for the war in Syria and for the resilience in Syria with its friends and allies. I'll be finishing in a minute. I think we are witnessing the gradual collapse of 500 years of old Western colonial empires and the rising dawn of the East. But we all have to be active partners in founding the new world system and in making sure that it reflects the ambition of humanity and the hope in a better, safer, more peaceful, and more prosperous future. The consistent efforts exerted by all your excellencies on different platforms and all these calls for conferences to listen to each other, to talk together, to address the world together is certainly a very laudable effort, leading hopefully to that dawn that we hope to deliver to our children and grandchildren. And I thank you very much in the name of Syria and in the name of the Syrian people and leadership for all your efforts. Thank you.